This podcast is the design of City Sites Urban Media, and our goal is to bring into focus the difference between culture and God's ideas found in His Word. To learn more, go to citysitesurbanmedia.com.
Human trafficking is far more prevalent, complex, and close to home than most of us realize. I've spent time in jails and brothels, interviewed hundreds of survivors and law enforcement NGO workers. And when I think about what we've done about human trafficking, I am hugely disappointed. Partly because we don't even talk about the problem right at all. We convince ourselves that human trafficking is a bad man doing a bad thing to an innocent girl. That story lets us off the hook. It takes away all the societal context that we might be indicted for the structural inequality or the poverty or the barriers to migration. We let ourselves think that human trafficking is only about forced prostitution, when in reality, human trafficking is embedded in our everyday lives.
According to the FBI, sex trafficking of children in this country has become a nationwide problem, and traffickers target troubled girls with low self-esteem.
By night and by day across the country, young American girls controlled by pimps are sent out to have sex for money, sometimes 20 men a night.
We had to make at least $1,000 a day. There was no days off.
They have to sleep with 10 to 20 strangers per night.
I would probably have up to 20. I was so exhausted.
He hit me a few times, and then he had a gun and he pointed it at me and he was like, "You need to do what I say." He's like, "I will kill you."
A study says the average age a girl enters prostitution is 12 to 14 years old.
This is the City Sites Podcast with Larry Kutzler.
Karen Diers is the city director for the Refuge for Women in Las Vegas, Nevada. The Refuge for Women is a national, faith-based organization providing a residential healing recovery program for survivors of trafficking and sexual exploitation. The ministry of Refuge for Women is to help these women find housing, counseling, life and work skills development. Karen has been working to build a bridge between the churches of her city and the program that is bringing women back from the exploitation of sex trafficking. Today, Karen is my guest. How did you ever get into this kind of work anyway?
When I moved to Las Vegas, I attended a human trafficking seminar just out of curiosity, knowing that the place in which we were now living had a lot of that going on. And so when I took in the seminar, I guess my heart was opened up and just learned so much.
And so that started you on a journey to where you are today, which you are the city director for Refuge for Women in Las Vegas. So when people think about human trafficking, what do they think about?
Well, people are still learning really what human trafficking is. It's not even a very old term. I would say probably 10, 20 years ago it wasn't even in use, and for sure 40 years ago. I think human trafficking has always been going on. The definition of human trafficking is when a person is bought or sold for commercial sex through fraud, force, or coercion. So when a woman is being used as a commodity, being used over and over again, and she's being sold for that purpose, that is human trafficking. And I think people maybe know that in the back of their minds, but I think people are just becoming more and more aware of not only the problem, but what we can do to help these women.
We don't really talk about slavery anymore. We're much more sophisticated than that. We talk about human trafficking. Human trafficking. Human and trafficking. Innocuous, right? Two perfectly ordinary words. Put them together, they form an innocuous phrase used to describe a horrific reality. We like to talk about numbers. $45 million spent per year in the U.S. for online sex trafficking alone. 21 million people enslaved globally. 300,000, that's the number of U.S. children at risk for human trafficking each year. $200,000 per year is what a pimp stands to make from just one victim. 15 years. That's the age by which most child victims are lured into sex trafficking. 15 years old. That's 9th grade.
You know, I was really amazed when you do some research into this that there are 403 million people that are trafficked in the world. I mean, that's incredible. That's like a nation.
Yeah, that's true. There's a $30 billion a year in profit annually from worldwide forced sex trafficking. That's how much money it generates. And, you know, we live in Las Vegas, and, you know, when you have 40 million plus visitors coming to your city a year, and a lot of them thinking that prostitution is legal, which it is not legal in Clark County, Las Vegas. It is outside of Clark County, but they come into the city thinking that it's legal, and of course they engage in that, and that brings about $5 billion into our city a year in illegal prostitution. It's very sad.
So in Las Vegas, for example, well, any city across the country, how does human trafficking get started? Is it basically surrounding around the entertainment world or sporting world, or how does it get started?
Well, we do know that sports events, primarily Super Bowl, generate a lot of extra human trafficking and selling of women to generate money and income. Here in Las Vegas, like I said, with 40 million plus visitors a year coming into the city for conventions and for the sporting events, that all brings it in. It's the supply and demand thing happening, and it's very sad when women are even brought across the state lines for Super Bowl or for big sporting events. Where there's the demand, they bring the supply. It's a big industry. A lot of money is made, and it's very sad when a woman can finally escape and try to get help, how much trauma she has endured.
You know, I know the churches are beginning to have some kind of interest in all of this, but it's like you said, it's a new term, it's a new dimension, even though it's the fastest growing crime in the world. So churches, pastors, Christian leaders, how do we get their attention?
Well, you're right, Larry. When you say human trafficking is a real problem all over the world, it is, including here in the United States. It's everywhere. It's a worldwide epidemic. It defies stereotypes, but we continue to build knowledge about the issue. We continue to build resources to help women escape, and I think the church plays a huge role in that, because a lot of times the churches have the budgets and their missions to reach out and help organizations that are trying to do something about human trafficking. And personally, I find the churches here in Las Vegas very intentional. They know where they live. They know the problems. And you know, in Las Vegas, you're not just going to find human trafficking, sex trafficking, or exploitation of women. You find everything every city encounters, right? So you've got poverty and homelessness and youth homelessness. But what a church does is they identify how God is leading them to contribute into their community or to help the community, and then they target those organizations, and then they find ways to help financially or with volunteer staff or outreach.
So many women, of course, are broken, and they come from broken lives. They come from sexual trauma somewhere in their early lives. It led them down this path. Is that usually the case for most of these women?
Right. Would call that vulnerable youth. Vulnerable youth that grow up in a home where maybe they didn't grow up in a home. Maybe it's foster care to foster care. Cases of child sexual abuse contributes in a huge way to that child running away, being vulnerable, hitting the streets. And pimps train pimps. They know what to look for. They are looking for that vulnerability. And those vulnerable youth, statistically, when youth run away and start walking the streets, within 48 hours, a third of them are picked up by a pimp. And they are forced into prostitution, where they are lured into it. They are given promises, psychological manipulations. These kids, and maybe not even kids, maybe, you're in your early 20s and you got picked up, but you've been lured into it. Drugs and alcohol are promised, but violence ensues. The trafficker's main purpose is to gain financially, and they'll make every effort to establish a trust and an allegiance. They woo the victim, and it feels like it's loving and caring, but that child soon realizes they are not only being forced into sex with the person that picked them up, but now his friends, or now the Johns that pay for it, and it becomes tragic in the life of that individual, because the trauma and the PTSD and all the mental health issues that come as a result of being trafficked or sold, especially in children. When you talk about children that grow up in this situation, they do not develop normally. So a child that's being raped 3 times a week by her father at the age of 5 or 6 has statistically huge issues. They do not develop the way they should in those very formidable years. And when that happens, then they develop all kinds of mental health issues, which then make them even more vulnerable. So now, let's say they're 15, 16, and they're a runaway, and let's say they get picked up. It's just a cycle, a downward cycle, that when we, as an organization or a safe house, takes in a woman and tries to rehabilitate her, we've got a lot of work to do.
You know, I sometimes like to use the term child sex slavery, where they force them to do sexual acts on video. And I'm talking, these kids are as young as 7 years old or younger.
My name is Jessa, and I'm a survivor of human trafficking. So when I was a little girl, my family was part of a group of people that severely sexually abused me. And that sexual abuse turned into me posing for pornographers and doing sex acts for the cameras and being raped in front of the cameras. And then that turned into me being sold to different pimps, and then me being sold to friends, and those friends doing whatever they wanted to do. It was taking place in suburban neighborhoods. I was also taken into a few other countries for the sole purpose of being trafficked and being sold. That was just my reality of cities and places.
You know, Karen, the ministry Refuge for Women is a perfect ministry for most churches or parachurch organizations to get involved with the broken, because that's what Jesus has called us to do. But
Right.
I wonder, Karen, when you talk about children like you have, I mean, are there residual things that just never get healed? What's the statistics of really coming out of something like this?
To answer that, let's talk about the mindset of a victim. So when a victim comes to us, we actually call her a survivor because she survived it, and now she's in a place where she can get help. They don't see themselves as victims. A lot of times they see their pimp as their boyfriend or their lover, their provider. They're in a survival mode, so that person provides food, shelter, even though he beats her if she doesn't perform, doesn't bring in enough money, which, by the way, $3,000 a night is not a large amount of money for her to be required to bring in. It can be up to $300,000 in a year. The pressure she's under and the fear she's under, her mindset, even though she clearly is a victim to us, she doesn't see herself sometimes as a victim. She has shame, self-blame, feelings of unworthiness, suicidal, and they often lie to their mental health professionals about their situations because they're afraid. They're afraid for their pimps getting caught. They're fearful. They have a trauma bond with their exploiter. They have deep loyalties, positive feelings, and again, that's hard for us to hear. It's hard for us to understand, but they come into a safe house like ours with all of this. They come in with dissociative orders. So what that means is at the time they're raped or they're going through sexual exploitation, they will disassociate themselves with that. Mentally, their bodies try to cope by shutting down mentally. That's why when it happens when they're very young, they don't develop right. But even later, when they have traumatic situations when they're being exploited sexually, they come in with PTSD, and we have to give them a lot of professional counseling and trauma-informed care. But back to the mindset of a victim, because drugs often play a large role in their exploitation. The pimps will give them the drugs and the alcohol to keep them numbed so they can keep doing what they're doing. So they get hooked on that, and the pimps know that, and they supply it. You know, if they can perform, they'll supply the drugs, and that's how they cope. And that's how they stay in the life, because they're now addicted to all that. So to answer your question, statistically, how many women can really come through this? All I can say is, in our experience, if you give them the things that they need to heal, to deal with the trauma bond, if you can give them counseling, specific types of counseling are very effective in trauma victims. If you can give them a home environment where they're loved, where they're taught, they have a vision and a desire for their own lives, and they want to fulfill those. So you give them the confidence that they need to do that, to get their GED, to get their college degree, to go out and work a normal job. If you can give them the tools in their tool belt to succeed, we see great success. But that said, Larry, even a 9 to 12 month program such as ours cannot completely heal what they struggle with, because again, it goes so deep. For some of the women, what they come in with is so psychologically bad that even after our program, they might need 2 more years in another safe house somewhere, another program.
Part of the solution, of course, is the Lord, and He does have access to these girls through what you do. So walk us through when a girl comes to you. First of all, that's a miracle in itself, I understand, but once a woman decides that she wants out and she comes to you, walk Walk us through, what do you do?
Well, we're a 3-phase program, and we built this around success metrics of other programs that we know work. We are faith-based, so I suppose bottom line, Larry, let me start by saying that if it weren't for that, I'd run so fast the other direction you'd never see me go. The faith-based element of a program like ours starts with the very, you are a child of God. You are created in His image. You are not a piece of property. You are not a commodity to be used like, you can use up drugs and alcohol and go get more, but with a woman who's being trafficked, she can be used over and over and over again. We start with the Word of God and who she was created to be, and that from the beginning of time, God had a plan for her life. So that's so important in our program, is for them to know that. Women come into our program and we don't discriminate. They'll come in and maybe they're not saved, and they'll get saved because they sense the Spirit of God in that home, and they'll get baptized. We'll baptize them in our swimming pool out back because they start to learn and understand the faith that way. But going from there then is being a 3-phase program. We start with the first few months just dealing with the heart. There are so many issues of trauma. Again, when a woman comes into our house, Larry, she's dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. She's got anxiety disorder, panic disorder. She has obsessive-compulsive disorder. I mentioned the dissociative disorder, where they have multiple personalities because they've had to kind of check out during their trauma. So they develop different personalities because of that. They've got major depressive disorder. I mean, disorder is the key word here. They have substance abuse disorder, explosive disorders. And so when they come in, we have to right away deal with disorders. We have to very quickly establish you are safe. They have to know they're safe, and that you are worthy, and that we are going to give you everything that we can. Those first few months are just healing the heart. They're getting professional counseling every week. They're getting group therapy together all the time. They're learning how to pray. They're learning how to hear God's voice. And then we take them into phase 2. And phase 2 would be, now it's time to get your GED if you don't have that yet. Let's talk about what you want to do in life. What kind of job do you want to have? Let's dream a little bit. Let's do personality assessments. Let's job training, leadership development. So more how to then understand when they step out of the house, what are they going to do? What kind of job are they going to have? And then we help them get that job. And phase 3 is aftercare. So they can stay in our program up to 12 months, work and come and go, and have more freedoms than they had when they came in. But we're still watching over them. It's still a 24/7, very careful, watchful eye to make sure that, again, they have the tools in their tool belt to succeed.
I immediately felt safe. I immediately felt like I was in a part of a family.
But Hannah is the first to admit her months of recovery have been painful.
This program hasn't been easy.
Victims of trafficking have usually experienced major and persistent trauma. It's comparable to what we know as PTSD. So because their injuries are so deep and sustained, the rehabilitation process is lengthy.
She has already been living an unstable and traumatic existence. Then you add the trauma of being trafficked, the violence, the neglect, the deprivation, the coercion, and that creates a complexity of trauma.
So, Karen, let's talk about you for a moment. When you're in the middle of all of this kind of trauma that's going on in every woman that comes into the program, what has God taught you as a result of what you're seeing, both in the trauma as well as the victories of these women coming through, finding God and rebuilding their lives?
Well, I am not a victim of trauma. I am not a victim of childhood sexual abuse. I'm not a victim of rape. I've not been sold repeatedly for 16 years, had to live under a bridge in Seattle called the Jungle. That was one of the gals that came to us. I've not had those experiences, Larry, and when I came into leading the program, I was on my face all the time, and I still am, eating the carpet, so to speak, just crying out to the Lord for wisdom, guidance, help me understand, help me to learn. I have learned that when you say yes to God in a season of your life when He's called you to something that's just maybe completely out of your ballpark, not your forte, but God, it's clear that you had the time and you had some skills that you could lead an organization and get this safe house open. And so you say yes and you do it. I learned the value of obedience and just doing it, just biting the bullet and doing it. And it's hard work. I learned that saying yes to God is not always the easy thing. I learned that when women that have these experiences experiences, backgrounds, trauma, abuse that I have not personally experienced. When they come into the home, I'm shocked. I guess I learn that, okay, we know that human trafficking is happening, and we know that women are abused sexually and they're being exploited. But when you talk to a woman and you hear her say, I was sitting in the front seat of the passenger side of the car of my pimp, and the other two women were in the back seat, so the four of us are heading back to the apartment, and he's going to beat us because we didn't make enough money that night, and he's already broken my jaw, and the car gets pulled over because of a broken tail light. The police comes to the window, and I see that as my only opportunity to cry out for help. So I tell the police, arrest me, I have a warrant. A lot of these women have a warrants, right? They're prostitution warrants. They've been arrested multiple times. And so she tells the police, I have a warrant, arrest me, and he, of course, does, but then recognizes her as the victim, which gets back to, I think, an earlier question as to what we're learning over the years is that these women, we may see them out on the street, but a lot of them, they're out of fear and coercion. They're doing what they're doing so they don't get beat that night, and they don't know how to get out. So when she gets arrested and they find out, yes, she is a victim of human trafficking, and they get her to a shelter, the shelter calls our organization, and next thing you know, she's in our home. And then last Saturday, a couple days ago, we graduated her, and she now is applying what she's learned and her heart of compassion toward other women now that are being trafficked, and she's down in the state she came from and seeking to help other women now. I have learned that saying yes to God and doing what He's asked you to do is not easy. I've learned that great things happen when we extend the heart of compassion to others who are broken and hurting, because at the end of the day, Larry, that's God's heartbeat. He wants to help these women. They've been crying out to Him. They've been asking for help, and at some point they get it. And God is so faithful then when they come into the program, then and we see what we're dealing with, which is a huge mess. Then I've learned that nothing's impossible for God, that these women that have come from just horrific circumstances actually can be healed and transformed. Are they perfect? No. Will they ever be like, for instance, my two middle 20s daughters who grew up in a safe home environment? They'll never be like that, perhaps, but they are going to have those tools in their tool belt that we're giving them, and professional counseling to help get them back on their feet and to fulfill their dreams. And in the end, that's what we do, and I've learned that it's possible. It's just really hard work.
It is possible. Anything is possible with the Lord. And Karen, you have done such great work, and I know that God is not done with you yet. As people are listening to this and they're thinking, well, I don't live in Las Vegas, but would like to learn more about your program or about the national program, which is out of Kentucky, I believe, where do they go for more information?
They can go to refugeforwomen.org, and that will take them to the national page. And you're right, we have 4 open houses in 4 states right now: Kentucky, here in Nevada, Chicago, and North Texas. And we just opened one in Ohio, so that's 5. And then we're getting ready to open up a crisis center, which is basically a 30-day triage for women right now, right today, right this moment, off the street, get them to a shelter, getting ready to open that up here in the summer. So the national organization just continues to keep opening up more homes. But if people go to that website, they will see the tabs for the different locations. And if they're interested in Las Vegas, they can look up the Southern Nevada tab, and that'll take them right to our page.
Karen, once again, thanks for joining us. It's been a pleasure talking with you and hearing the miracles that God has been doing through you and through the program Refuge for Women in Las Vegas. Thanks again.
Thanks, Larry.
She credits relationships in the shelter with giving her the strength to press on.
Know that they would do anything in their power to see me succeed. And knowing that, it keeps me strong.
Thank you for joining us today. Every Friday, we bring you this podcast with interviews with people who are challenging the status quo of Christianity and challenging the cultural norms of our day. Please help us get the word out by sharing the link to this podcast with your online friends and family. Our website also contains other podcasters who are part of the City Sites network of communicators, all sharing the good news of Jesus Christ. Our website is citysitesurbanmedia.com.
This is the City Sites Podcast Network.